All right, and we are live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 34, I believe this is, of Narrations and Lamentations with Mittierim and Boys. I am your host, Mittierim, and with me tonight is one and a half of the boys. Skip is with us, and Michael is dealing with his god-awful computer for the fourth consecutive week. Skip, say hey.
I told you he needs to go back to the peasant gun school because we always hit targets and he always misses with this computer. So I don't know where we're going with that. So I I lost the beard and mustache today. I'm just all off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now he's trying to send me video calls. I'm like, no, we've got this show going on. You need to join it and learn how to operate the computer. All right. So tonight we've got kind of a strange episode compared to some of what we've done before. Our topic tonight, and I still haven't found a good way to explain this, so no doubt people are not understanding what we're aiming for. We're going to discuss how to craft a narrative and how crafting a narrative for something like a Warhammer campaign is different from where most of us came from in narratives based on role-playing games, D&D specifically. I think there's quite a bit different in the way that the narrative is constructed, and hopefully this discussion will prove entertaining, if not informative, for those who are trying to get their own narrative going. So before we really get into that, though, let's go ahead and talk a little bit of hobby time. You got anything on your table these days, Skip?
I'm still working on my Wood Elf. Speaking of new narratives, trying to get them ready to go. I got a couple of test lists I can't wait to try out tomorrow. So it should be interesting.
Very cool. Speaking of which, Alicia is working on the last two of your Sisters of the Thorn.
Yes.
So they should be done in relatively short order. And you'll be able fairly soon, no doubt. As for me, I'll be straight. I've been taking a little break from the palette and paintbrush recently. I'm giving myself some breathing room after all of those lizard men. I still have another 16 Saurus warriors primed and sitting in my ready pile that I don't have the wherewithal to engage with right now. But the more interesting new thing, which will actually probably be the next thing I paint before I even tackle those Sauruses, is I finally got the model for my new Vampire Lord, or my vampire character for the new narrative. I ordered one from Hassle-Free Miniatures in England.
Mm-hmm.
And I got it in. It's a metal model. I like it. It's going to be... Well, I'll be honest. It's going to be a pain in the butt for me to paint. I think the model is a little above my paint skills. And so we'll see how well that turns out. But in a random side note, one thing I just want to talk about Hassle-Free Miniatures. If you've never ordered for them, they're a great company. They do a lot of very interesting sculpts. I've used them before for my demon army. All of my characters are pretty much Hassle-Free Miniatures, including the harem girls that are spread around the base of my Keeper of Secrets. They're all hassle-free. But the reason I mention this is when they send you your package, they include strange British candy in it. It's like, and I don't know if, like, maybe if I have any British viewers, you guys will be able to tell me whether this stuff is real or not, or whether it's just like gag candy they sent on. But like, the candy they sent this time was this like taffy-ish sort of thing. I don't know if you ever had Laffy Taffy. It was kind of like that, but it was lemon. And what they said, it had a sherbet center. And like the inside of it, when you bite into it, it's like that taffy thing, and you're just pulling like crazy. And then when you get to the center of it, it almost feels like Pop Rocks.
Oh, wow.
And it was so weird. It's such a strange sensation. I couldn't eat more than a bite of it. Alicia finished it off, but it's like every time I've ordered something from them, they've sent some just bizarre ass strange British candy, and I think it's kind of cool because it's something that sets them apart. But it was just very weird, and it's not something you would expect from a miniatures company. But if anybody does like checking out some interesting miniatures, check out Hassle Free. They're a good company. Speaking of good companies and or service providers, we've also been in discussion with Black Tower Terrain, who is in the process of working on some new terrain for the new campaign. We've decided this time, instead of just making one person, namely me, foot the bill for all the terrain, we're going in as a group. That way we can go ahead and get stuff done, and we don't have to wait for my terrible finances to clean themselves up. But what he's working on for us right now is a sorceress portal. And given how badly we are screwed over on a regular basis by that particular piece of terrain, I'm really looking forward to actually having it be beautiful and on the table and screwing us over. So.
Exactly.
Right. As a side note, I don't know if you're on his Facebook, but he did this just ridiculously amazing, like, multi-tier waterfall piece of terrain last week. It's like sweet. I mean, I don't know how useful it would be for Warhammer because it's so busy. Mm-hmm. I think it would be more something for like 40K where individual models moving around, but it was freaking gorgeous. So, I want to see if we've gotten any comments too, because with this one, so I guess we'll discuss a little bit about how tonight's going to go. Normally we do our talk on sort of the topic and then the questions at the end. However, the questions that we got this week are very much right alongside sort of what I was planning on talking about anyway. Mm-hmm. So we're going to kind of sprinkle the questions in as we go because I think they'll just help shape the conversation a little more. So we'll go ahead and get into it and see where we can go from there. So obviously, when we talk about where we've come from and how we form our narratives, it's very important to know that we all have been role players first. I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons for many, many, many years. I have been a dungeon master in that particular game for many, 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 many years. And in fact, my current homebrew game has been running pretty consistently, minus a few small 4 or 5 month breaks here and there, for the last 16 years. So I have a lot of, I would consider a significant pedigree in the narrative functions of the role-playing game. Skip, why don't you tell a little bit about your experience so they know that we're not just completely talking out our asses.
Well, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons back in the Ford administration. If you go back that far, back in the late '70s, when the Blue Book came out, I think it was the first Blue Book, the one with the dragon on the cover. It's really sweet. That's when I started. Mm-hmm. And I've been playing pretty much straightforward since then. Maybe I took a year here and there off, but I mean that's well over 30-some years. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing it for quite some time. I have played in a lot of genres, played a lot of different types of games. So although I don't have as much GM experience as Josh does, I have a lot of playing experience in a lot of different games. So where I'm coming from is speaking with lots of geek experience myself. So.
And if Michael were to ever join us, his experience is primary purpose too, though not nearly as long as either of us have been playing. So he was going to be kind of our newbie voice. Yeah. So in terms of creating a narrative, obviously it can be argued that creating a narrative is not necessarily at the core of either role-playing games or Warhammer. Obviously not in the case of Warhammer, but there's a lot of different reasons that people craft a narrative in role-playing games or choose not to. For us, I think both Skip and I have been very narratively oriented players of many role-playing games for a long time. So the first question I want to ask Skip is, what is it about the narrative style of these games where we want to tell a story, and how do you think the telling of that story differs between the two types of games?
Well, I think, first of all, what gets me into this is because you can create a being, so to speak, that's not you, but it is you. You know, you can shape it however you want to. If you want to play it like the personality that you are, you can. But if you want to step outside your comfort zone, you can pretty much put together whatever you choose to do so. When it comes to role-playing games, you can have a significant feel or a significant say in exactly what direction your character can go, because you can choose A or B, or sometimes even C, that you can do. The one thing I've noticed in Warhammer, and this problem that I've had with the scenarios that we've done so far, is you're kind of at control of the dice as to what's going to happen in the storyline. You don't really have 100% control on it like you would in a role-playing game. And speaking as one who does not have a lot of wins under his belt during the current narrative, I seem to have always been writing from the losing side. So it makes it a little bit difficult, to have what you want your characters to do in that type of situations, whereas in a role-playing game, you have better control over it.
Mm-hmm. And actually, you could not have given a more perfect setup to me mentioning the first question that we had was actually from Vince. And he talks a little bit in that question. I'm not going to quote the whole thing because he wrote me a freaking paragraph here. But the distinction that he makes, and it's one that I think is very important, is that in an RPG, a lot of your narrative buildup happens pre-action, i.e., before the dice are rolled. You get to build a scenario, you get to interact, and there are ways to interact and make the scenario go your way without ever resorting to the dice. I mean, heck, 2 weeks ago in the normal D&D game I ran, nobody touched the dice for 4.5 hours. Mm-hmm. And we still told a story and advanced the narrative, as opposed to Warhammer is a post-action narration, in that because of sort of the function of the game of Warhammer, it is supposed that you can't break away from those dice rolling because they are a fundamental part of the game. You can't go through, well, I guess theoretically it is possible to go through a game of Warhammer without rolling dice, but it would be a terrible game of Warhammer. We're just going to move around each other and never get in range of anything. I don't know. And so that was sort of the point he makes. Now, I can agree with that to a certain point, and to your point as well, to a certain point. I think, though, the difference is one of limitation. And I've always believed that limitation is the fodder for creativity. I don't like playing in games where the DM is just like, here's all the books, do what you want. I want a flavor and a fluff and game choices that limit what I can do, because that's going to spark ideas. And I think being attached to the events of the Warhammer game does similarly to me personally. Yes, it could be argued that I don't have as much control in the formation of the narrative, but I think by having to sort of match what I'm coming up with and where I want the story to go based on what the dice and the game has shown me, makes me have to be more creative. It comes up with stories that I may not have have done anything with. Just because we're having to find some way to bend the story to fit the event. Do you think that's fair?
I say that's a fair assumption, or a fair point there, because it does force you. If you have one thing in mind, for example, let's go back to what's happened. When I first created Alphonius, heck, I thought he's going to get the gem and keep going with it, or the pearl, but he ended up. Look what happened to him. So it caused me to think outside the box a little bit when it comes to that character. And in that particular instance, yes, it was very, very good, I thought. I still think that, with a role-playing game, you're going to have a little bit better control over it. But it does take you to different levels when it comes to taking some things out of your hands, if that makes any sense.
I can agree with it. Now, the other thing sort of to comment to this end is that I think both of them, role-playing games and narrative Warhammer campaigns, can be argued that they are collaborative creative efforts. So here is my question to you. Which do you think leads itself to more collaboration and more sort of varied input from the various players? A traditional role-playing game or something done in the campaign thus far?
Well, if you look at it like that, I think that we've had more creative juices flowing among us with the narrative more than a D&D campaign, because we are writing off of what the others, you and Michael, I'm writing off of you and what you and Michael have done. You're writing off of what Michael and I have done. So I think the creativity has been sparked more in that way than in a normal D&D game. Yes, you're going to come up with your character background. You can tell the GM what your background is, and good GMs will incorporate that into their plans to make it interesting for you, plus still tell the story that they want to tell. But this narrative would fall flat on its face if we did not all work together, on it. So I think in that case, I think the narrative part for Warhammer is more of a creative flow than a role-playing game could be.
I agree, and I ultimately think the difference in that is purely the presence of a game master. In the Warhammer campaign, we really haven't set one of us above the others as sort of the final arbiter of things. So we're all kind of on the same tier, and our interactions have been pretty even, and I think it adds to that because everybody's voice is sort of equally valid. Whereas in a more traditional D&D game, and now we may both be showing our particular slant towards role-playing in general with these statements, so take them with a grain of salt, as we are both classify ourselves as old school type folks. The creative energy, I think, in a role-playing game flows downward. You have by far the DM doing more of the creation in terms of the world, the setting, the plot lines, and yes, you do get some of that reflected back when the players become engaged and they provide interactions of their own, provide plot points of their own and stuff like that. But I still think that the sort of creative juice flows in primarily in one direction. And so I think if you look at a game run in that fashion, you'll see, as one would expect, primarily one sort of creative overarching energy. Whereas opposed to what we're doing in the Warhammer campaign right now, because each of us, everything we put together is sort of equally valid, we're designing these stories and these write-ups for ourselves sort of evenly after the games are done, I think you're getting a more even split of sort of that creative impetus. Mm-hmm. I hope any of that made sense and it wasn't just me rambling on for 2 minutes.
No, I mean, we don't have a central control person, nominating, okay, you're going to play this week, and you're going to play this, and this is what needs to happen. This is what, how you're going to set this up. We don't have that. We just kind of go, hey, who's going to play this week? Okay, who's going to write? Who's going to write the beginning? Who's going to write the end? That's kind of how we do it. It's all a collective thing. It's not just one person. I guess if we really wanted to, we could do that, but I think it diminishes from what we're trying to do as far as Warhammer is concerned.
Mm-hmm. I can agree. Mm-hmm. Now, this in my mind, maybe this is a clunky transition, but this actually leads into one of the questions that Nicholas Belair put forth. In that, do you think that the scope of the storytelling in a Warhammer game has to be, quote unquote, higher level? That's to say, are you forced to tell stories of sort of the clash of mighty nations versus the story of few individuals, which you can get from a role-playing game?
I want to take both sides of that story. I think in the larger game that we're doing now, yes, it's epic-wide. Yes, it's affecting each army in its entirety. Now, I think with the new campaign, I think we can take the time to focus on one of our generals or one of our wizards and watch them build up by what we choose to go after, as far as the spoils of war, so to speak. But I think overall, for the big campaign that we've been playing, yeah, it's been, this is going to affect Britannia. This is going to affect all of the Empire. This is going to affect the Dwarven Nation. It's all big scale. And I think with the new campaign, we are shrinking that down to the small scale. And I think we can tell a little bit more individual stories than we could in the campaign that we have going now.
I absolutely agree. I think, like with any sort of creative storytelling, whether it's D&D or Warhammer, the scope is really something that can be decided by the players. Yes, to a certain degree with Warhammer, because it is a game of battles, you are sort of anchored to those battles as your sort of flashpoints for the different storylines. But I don't necessarily think that is inherently a scale issue. I mean, yeah, you're not necessarily just going to be telling something of these 4 dudes went into this dungeon. And, I mean, I guess theoretically we could play Mordheim or something if we wanted to tell that story. But I think there's a big difference in sort of representing, I mean, whether we count the models, like each model is actually one dude. I mean, that's a pretty small interaction if you do that, particularly at 1,000 points. It's like, 20 dudes fight 20 dudes. That's like a gang fight in the streets or something. Or if you take it as representative and it's like 1 dude equals 100 dudes, then you have this whole like epic, these 2 civilizations slamming into each other. So I really think the scale is not necessarily automatically decided by the type of storytelling you're doing.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, that kind of leads into his follow-up question is, do you think that the difference between the two is simply the number of choices you make? For example, he talks about how if you look at the narrative as kind of a choose-your-own-adventure, in an RPG, any decision you make can branch off into any infinite number of decision points, whether it's a battle or whether it's choosing to stay at the inn here or the one down the street. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the Warhammer campaign, it's primarily the outcomes of the battles that are your branch points for the narrative. So do you think that's primarily the difference? And if so, which one do you think is preferable for telling, as a storytelling tool?
I think it comes back to how you set up the story in Warhammer. All right, let's use what we're thinking about. For example, let's say that my Bretonnian paladin A wants to gather or grab the virtue that gives him the heroic killing blow. Okay, we could set up a story. I can write the story. This is where he's going to go. This is how he's going to pray. Blah 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 to get it. even though that I may lose that battle, I may still fulfill what I wanted to do to gain that virtue. So there are a lot more options. It's more clear to find than loser winner with the way that we're setting this up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that, if you look at it from that particular side, yeah, you can write a successful story using smaller characters here in Warhammer as opposed to role playing games. If you go with that scale, I think in the larger scale maybe not, but I think in what we're trying to accomplish, you can.
I could agree with that. Interestingly enough, I'm going to kind of take a different tack with answering this. While I do think, sort of in its pure form of sitting around and enjoying it at the table, the RPG level of branch points is much better. I think it tells a much better story because there's so much more that's in the hands of the players, and there's so much more that can be sort of changed on the fly, that sort of thing. However, for how we are representing this in terms of doing narrative battle reports and kind of getting it out to the internet, I think the limited choice points that's inherent in a Warhammer campaign is better. Because you get the story, it progresses, there's not a lot of unnecessary sort of time-wasty things that would fill up a battle report. I mean, God, when I put in narratives, my battle reports are already 45 minutes long on average. I mean, you could do, if you did like a live play D&D session, those go into the hours if you're getting a good game, and nobody would ever watch it. So I think for what we're aiming on trying to accomplish, I think that the limited number of choice points are more helpful, if that makes sense.
Makes sense.
So, so just a point, we got a couple of comments as Nicholas is, I guess he's commenting on the Warhammer YouTubers page as opposed to the comment section, because I'm getting emails and not seeing them pop up in the comments. But apparently you have him beat. 1981 was his D&D start.
I'm old.
You both have me beat because I was born in 82. So we'll just leave that as that. Let's see. He then asks, are we going to do an end cap video of the campaign with a slideshow of everything and an abridged narrated timeline start to finish? Absolutely not. While I do, like, I want to do like a retrospective, and I think we'll actually do a Narrations and Lamentations show to discuss the whole thing as it goes and kind of retell sort of our favorite parts and that sort of thing. The amount of work it would require to do the video that you are discussing is just something I have absolutely no interest in doing. If somebody is, and to be honest, because my computer started getting filled up, I deleted all the pictures except for like the last 8 to 10 battle reports anyway. So not really a possibility. And apparently we bring up a good point. Would we consider a mixed game narrative where you play Warhammer, Mordheim, etc. to tell different sides to a single narrative?
That's interesting.
It is. It actually kind of reminds me of the D&D, the second edition campaign world Birthright, where you basically, your characters were like lords that were all god-blooded, and so you started off like even as base level characters with your own domain and dudes that served you, and so you could do like your normal dungeon crawly type things, but you also had armies, so if you wanted to like battle out into somebody else's domain, you had your troops, so you kind of got both sides of that story. I would definitely consider doing it. But here's the reason why it won't happen. I have only once glanced at the Mordheim rules, and mainly only that to try and loot them for something else. And we have nothing near the type of city terrain that we would need to do a Mordheim game. So likelihood of that happening, very, very small. But it is an interesting an interesting way of doing things. To be honest, I almost think we would be more likely, just given the personalities involved, to like whip up like D&D one shots based in the Warhammer world to do that kind of thing, rather than do Mordheim and then go to Warhammer. It'd probably be like Warhammer to D&D.
Yeah.
Would just be my general guess on how that would proceed. So I guess the last of the questions we have, and I kind of want to get into this next, was the second question from Vince. And he says, do you feel that you have the same personality characters that you have with your Warhammer armies? I.e., if you like to play Bold Shining Knights, you play Bretonnia, etc.
I think to a degree, yeah. I enjoy playing Bright Shiny Knights. So that's why I took the Bretonnia at first. I like playing Rangers and Woodland types now. You know, my thing is shifted, so that's why I kind of picked up the Wood Elves. So I can see that. I can see that. You know, my personality tends to bleed over into what armies I choose.
I was actually going to answer the opposite. I really don't see that my role playing style, like when I sit down to game,
Hello. Google Chat. Gotta love it.
about it really the well, the Warriors, who never really got into the narrative, I'm not really counting them, but the Empire is for the most part the only army that I've played that doesn't have some sort of female characters in it. I mean, hell, I even had them when I was playing my dwarves. So I would say that bleeds over. I don't know what it says about me personally, but I was actually earlier today. I was going through some old files in my computer of games that I had played under 3 different GMs, under 3 different rules editions of D&D, and my characters and the sheets and the backstories and something like that. I was something like 80% female characters.
Mm-hmm.
Very few dudes. So say that for what you will. I'm not entirely sure what that says about me as a player, or if anything, I don't know. But I definitely think that shows up in sort of my willingness to make female characters, which is an ultimately frustrating thing in Warhammer, as I'll get off topic a little bit, because there's so few actual Warhammer models that are female.
Yep.
I mean, there's really, other than the elves have some female characters, like nobody else does. I think the vampire counts have 1 female, other than the Coven Throne ones. Yeah. They have like 1 female vampire, which I have, but I'm frankly not liking the whole like Louis the 15th style, big hair, what have yous. So actually, I'm going very, very simple for the new vampire lady I have. She's I don't even, like, it's certainly not supposed to be a vampire, but I figure with the right paleness of the skin and the right color, I can make it work. So
I'm looking forward to seeing that. But I'll kind of ditto what you. I haven't played a lot of female characters. The ones when I do play them, and I think I joked about this before, I base them off of my ex-girlfriend's personality. So I actually have the personality in mind when I sit down and actually play them. So yeah. And I'm being serious. That's how I do it.
Yeah.
Scary, huh?
Just a little. I'm trying to even think of if you've, because I mean, Skip and I have been role playing together for what, getting close to 2 years now, 3 years?
3 years, I think. Yep.
And I don't think you've played a female in my campaigns.
Not for a long period of time. I played the Hamna Dryad once, but
okay.
And then I played the dwarf, but we didn't play that campaign very long. So really only 2.
So, but yeah, So let me ask you this, since we're on the topic, has the personality of any of your exes leaked into your Warhammer narrative?
Yes, actually, my girlfriend that I dated before my wife is one I based my dark elf sorceress on. Yep.
Is it video appropriate for me to ask that you supply some more details on that, or is it something that we should carry on after the video goes off?
I'll give you the PG version of it. She was an over controlling individual with delusions of mistresshood domination. More of mental than anything. More mental than anything else. So not to the extreme on the other side, but.
So I'm going to just quote what Vince has said in response to that. Skip, that seems like it would make for some interesting characters at the table.
What do you see if we ever switch characters again? What do you see the next one I come up with? It's based on my first girlfriend, so I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll talk off the video. We're as a side note, and I'm going to totally like call some shit out right here. So, everybody knows that my wife is into painting too, but she's also a big role player. She's gamed with me for, God, basically since we met. It's almost 13 years now. And right now, currently, she's the only female that plays with us as a player. She's also the only female character in the game. And one of the... Whoops. I think I accidentally like full screen myself. One of the current things that's been coming up in the campaign is the potentiality of a relationship, a romantic relationship forming between my wife's character and Skip's character. And we have our own little Google group where we kind of talk about the game in the midweeks and stuff. And on this Google thing for like 45, 50 messages just talking about that. And I talked to Skip and I was like, you know what? We have a strange ass hobby, dude. I don't know anywhere else where I can watch emails of some dude talking about hooking up with my wife and not owe him a punch in the face at the end of the day.
Interesting conversation.
It just on occasion, like, I mean, I've been a gamer so long that I don't think about this stuff very often, but occasionally the thought just occurs of how weird is this if somebody just randomly at work looked over my shoulder and saw this stream of emails and is like, isn't that your wife? And I'm like, so that actually brings me to sort of another question in this. Anybody you talk to that's been a role player for any length of time has just stories about how their character did this that one time and it was super cool, and they're very, very emotionally invested in that. Do you feel that the type of narrative build for a game like Warhammer leaves itself open for that kind of emotional engagement with characters? Do you think that 3-4 years from now we're going to be sitting around talking about what happened when X character did X, or is it just something that's going to kind of fade away in place of the next campaign?
Again, I think because we're starting at such a small point level, I think we are allowed to become emotionally involved with the characters more than we did before. Because, you know, we are basically taking them from just a step above core at the hero level to make them the Lord level. So you're going to see that progression, hopefully, starting my paladin up to a Bretonian Lord or, a higher spell. I think you get more involved in it. You start paying more attention to the character because you are spending the time to do this.
Right.
So I think in what we're doing, yes, I think you can. In a couple of years, we could go back and say, "Oh, you remember when my paladin, just almost fell into the maw pit because he was trying to get this sword?" Yeah.
Cool. Hey, can you fill in some dead air for a minute? I'll be right back.
Yeah. Anyway, but still, I think with the way Warhammer is, and this is one thing that kind of turned me against it when I first heard about it, because I used to play with a group up in Virginia, at a game store, and a lot of what they did was Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40K, and I always joked, I said, well, I'll never get involved with that. It's not for me. It's just a bunch of, gooblers rolling dice. And I think if I tried to do something like this up there, it would have fallen on his face because they were more, and as much as, I call them friends and everything, they got a little bit over competitive when it came to Warhammer. And I've told them that to their faces too. So it's not anything that if they ever go back and watch this that they'd be shocked about. But it's just something that I never got into, even though I love the fantasy genre, and that's usually the genre I come back to. If I step away from gaming for a little bit, I always come back and want to play fantasy. But when it comes to what we're doing now and what we've kind of built with the other campaign, and even starting with the Blood in the Badlands we did, it kind of got me more invested in actually learning the rules, giving it a chance, because one, I knew the guys really well. I knew that they were good role players, and I knew they weren't going to be, overly competitive when it came to things. And I think they knew that I hadn't played before, and they would take the time and actually teach me, and they're still teaching me now. So that's kind of how I felt about the whole coming into Warhammer from a role player stance.
Cool. I hate having to step away during one of these and let you talk, because now I got to go back and watch the whole thing and hear what you said about me. So here's the next topic I wanted to discuss a little bit. And it kind of funnels into the whole narrative thing. But do you feel that either role-playing games or Warhammer, places the rules as more sacrosanct? I mean, I know if we were playing D&D... The general consensus is, if X needs to happen to make a better story, then the rules can go take a flying fuck. However, I think there is less acceptance of that in Warhammer. Do you agree, disagree? I mean, what?
This kind of gets back to the point I was talking about that you can go back and watch in the video when I was trying to kill some time with. The group that, when I first learned about Warhammer up in Virginia, I guess we could call them rules lawyers. And I've told them that to their face. So they go back and watch this and say, yeah, you've told us that before, so it's nothing new. And that's why I never got into it, because they were over competitive, I thought. And it just did not interest me at all, And I think that when it comes to people like that or things like that, I think you're going to see more of that in a Warhammer situation than you would a role playing, because there are a lot of rules that you have to follow to make the game go like it should. Whereas I think you can bend it here and there with the role play, because you can bend it to where it is part of the narrative. So I think if we look at it that way, I think it would be more easier to rules lawyer a Warhammer game than it would a role playing game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things that just I was thinking about, and it's like, because I think maybe because of sort of what Vince was talking about earlier about being sort of pre-action versus post-action, it's very hard, like in the middle of a game of Warhammer, to have something happen and go, well, that's not super right to the narrative, let's not do that, and then it turns around being just like this horrible snowballing effect that ends up stomping one side instead of the other just because you were trying to make something fluffy, as opposed to because there are so many more of those decision points in a role-playing game, you have more of the ability to be flexible with it, I think, is ultimately the difference.
Well, that being said, if we come across something that we're not sure of, usually whoever's playing will say, why don't we just call it this way? This is the way it's going to be. We'll roll for it. 1, 2, or 3, this happens. 4, 5, 6, that happens. And then we'll go back and check later.
Right.
And that's, that's how it's a friendly game. So we can do things like that.
Like, just off the top of my head in recent memory, the casting of Transformation of Kaidan by your mounted wizardess.
Yeah.
It's just something we got wrong. And
it made for an interesting story, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, like, I'm not sweating it. Same thing when Michael killing blowed my dude on the monster, my vampire dude, and that took out both of those dudes from the narrative. It's like, yeah, it was wrong, and that's just sort of how it went. But on the other hand, it led to a better story, I think. So I'm not going to sweat it.
Right.
So apparently Vince says, talking about whether you can have those cool moments, he says those things are certainly true for his Mordheim experience, as he still talks about his hero for his original Skaven warband from 16 years ago and several others in between. I think if there's any difference in the events you talk about with war games, are almost completely determined by out-of-the-box luck, i.e. the result of a large string of unlucky dice rolls. When it comes to RPGs, only half of the crazy stories are results of that, and the other half are actual decisions or moments of the story. I can see that. Though I do have to say there are I think there is a certain joy to be found in the role playing or in the wargamings when you just come up with that crazy plan that works unexpectedly, and that can go there too. But I think I get the point you're making.
Or when Michael's Beastman just pretty much decimated my witch elf block.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. We're gonna be talking about that for a long time.
Yeah.
Just crazy crap like that.
When I think it's those surprise points in both games, in both RPGs and Warhammer, that really makes it. I mean, I still think my favorite story point of this entire campaign was when my ogress sucked herself down the whole first game of trying to be a necromancer.
Mm-hmm.
And because that led to... Because we had to react to that led to just all that craziness with her falling to Nurgle and that fight. And I think it really added a lot of narrative punch that would not have happened had I not rolled miscast Dimensional Cascade. I think we would have lost out on a lot of the narrative. And I think there's a lot of points in role-playing games where that sort of thing happens too. Where you just your plan works right, one lucky roll goes nuts or fails, and things get crazy. And I think that can lead to a lot of very interesting stories along down the line.
Yeah, just like this past Sunday, Michael, told us about backstabbing the Green Dragon. That was a couple of years ago. And it's still an interesting story to hear. So.
Well, for the record, they had to. They really worked for that one. It wasn't as easy. But I think Vince is trying to comment in with something else, but because Google is slow and stupid, it's sending me emails that it only reveals half of them to me, and then okay, here we go. Talking about the rules change, he says he thinks we're dead on. If you suddenly change a rule in the middle of a Warhammer game, it's easy for one side to feel cheated, or to be cheated, I guess, is what he says. In an RPG, you have a game master who's the ultimate arbiter who can simply discard what doesn't work for the narrative. In case of what you two were talking about with dicing off, it's only when you can't agree on a gray rules area that you bring in the flip of the coin or employ the rule of cool thing. You don't tend to say, well, your elves don't have ASF here because I don't think it's appropriate given the rainy conditions. Well, interrupting what he's saying. Well, we might say that if somebody ever got off their butt and got us a rainy conditions table done up, like he said a month ago.
I know I got Blizzard done.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So only a billion other weather types then?
I've only got, we got 5 more to go.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So you're forgiven now. I'll stop razzing you. Whereas in an RPG, your GM could certainly impose an initiative penalty on you in similar conditions. Yeah, I agree. I think fundamentally, if you're looking at the primary difference between crafting a narrative in a Warhammer campaign versus crafting one in a D&D campaign, is the presence of a dungeon master. When you have somebody who ultimately should not or does not have any great stake in who wins, there is more ability there to kind of bend things to fit and change them around and stuff like that. So I definitely think that's probably the biggest difference. Would you agree, Skip?
I agree. I get it. We could really do it in Warhammer because, Alicia doesn't give a flip what the 3 of us do when it comes to Warhammer. So I guess if we really needed a true neutral body, she would be it because she'd tell you off anyway. But
right. She does that without me even asking her to. So
exactly. So, but yeah, I think when you bring in the dungeon master, I think you have more of that in the role playing scenario than you would in a Warhammer scenario. So,
and that's a cute idea, but I'll tell you right now, that would go on for maybe 2 games, and she would just lose absolute patience with us. And every time something came up, it would just be like, "You're all buried under squigs," and die. There would be goblins just erupting from the ground. And that would be it. She'd just be like, "I don't want you asking me any more stupid questions. You all die."
You all die. Wow. And the scary part is, he's right.
Yeah. My wife, though she is a lovely woman, she loves role-playing, she really has very little in the way of patience for Warhammer itself. I honestly think if it weren't for the painting, she would have nothing to do with the hobby. So that she certainly would not do well as with us coming to her for like game mastery things through a Warhammer campaign. That would just not go well at all. She'd make all of her decisions based on which army was better painted, and knowing her level of preference, she'd just be like, "You both look like you suck. You both die."
It is true.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I was looking through the Big Red rule book, and it does talk about where it mentions doing campaigns. It does basically suggest that you can get a game master for the campaigns, but for me, that would be boring as crap. Mm-hmm. Because I think ultimately, like in a D&D game, you have a game master who's by themselves and not sort of connected to the group, but that person is still participating. In a game of Warhammer, like in a Warhammer campaign, if you are going to have somebody who's completely impartial as a third party GM, they're never going to get the chance to play. Because if they've got their own army in it, then you're automatically jacking up your impartiality right there. So
yeah,
I don't know that it's a great concept.
No, I think it's better that we all police each other, because we have the understanding. Unless it's good for the plot line, we know that the major characters are not going to die at first, until they get built up. We all have that. We all have that understanding. Well, we all have that understanding now.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit too. Mm-hmm. I think one of the big fundamental sort of things about the way either of these things work is, to use the fancy word, is the social contract. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you sit down in a D&D game, you understand that guy's the GM. He's going to be the boss here. He'll arbite everything. We're the group. Yeah, ideally in successful groups, that comes with the, let's not backstab each other. Let's not steal shit from each other. That sort of thing. How big a part do you feel the social contract is in terms of a Warhammer campaign and trying to tell a narrative during one?
It has to be a big part. I mean, really, because whatever let's say you and I sit down and your lizardmen wipe off the board of my wood elves, which is probably what's going to happen. What we're going to write because of that is still going to affect Michael, even though Michael is just sitting on the side watching what's going on in that battle. But he's going to have a say-so in it because this could affect the next battle that he's going to come up with, on exactly what happens. So again, we have to go with the shared brain theory that we all have to be pretty much on the same page when it comes to major decisions with which direction that we're going to go.
So let me ask this: how much do you think that social contract influences the decisions within the game? I mean, even down to what army am I going to play? What list am I going to build? How much of it do you think with telling a narrative, how much do you sacrifice the sort of more competitive, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do with my army for that sort of social contract to make sure that the game runs smoothly?
Well, I mean, look at it. I think I've taken, what was it? Oh shoot. What's that the death spell, I just leave it in my brain.
Purple Sun?
Thank you. I think maybe I've only taken that once in all the games that I played death, and I haven't played death that much. It was just me. I don't want that. I do not want that used against me. I think we talked about that last week on my opinion on that spell. So my social contract is you're probably never going to see that spell in a narrative campaign from me. So I think when it comes to that, that's the way I look at it. I want it to be fun for you guys as it's fun for me.
Mm-hmm. And I think to a certain degree, I mean, that's already influencing our main decisions. I think, I mean, we can be honest here. I think the main reason that Michael's backing off of High Elves as his choice is the fact that I'm so butthurt about them. I mean, I understand for you High Elf players, there is a certain part of my brain that understands that it's not fair to be racist to you because you have a broken book. No, that was a joke. Please don't come hunting for me. But for me, I don't have fun playing High Elves, and after the last couple of games that unfortunately we didn't get battle reports for them, just there's some disconnect, and Michael doesn't feel like he can, like there's a list that he can make with what he wants to play that doesn't come off as too douchey for him to want to play. And just, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily have anything to do with the does the list work? Because obviously the answer to that is yes, but more, does it work in a manner that makes sure everyone has fun, win or lose? Mm-hmm. And I think that, in my opinion, I think that kind of sort of social contract is much harder to balance in a Warhammer campaign than it is in an RPG. Maybe very well because of sort of the absence of that DM persona there. But I see it something we've already kind of, even in the new campaign, which hasn't even started yet, we've had a couple of bumps on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it comes down to the fact that away from the table, we're all friends, So we're not going to do anything, at least conscious-wise, to piss one of the others off. But let's go back to the example, even in the current campaign. When you take your ogres, and as much as I hate the ogres, you do a good competitive list that aren't douchey. You don't take the huge Death Stars or things like that. You spread it around. You spread the crap equally, as far as I'm concerned, on the other side of the table. But again, it comes back to that social contract, because you know that one, you probably just run over us all the time, which you do anyway. But you know what I'm trying to say,
right?
So,
See, you mentioned that, and you haven't even seen my list for the final game. It's going to be nothing but giant ogres with multiple death casters throwing peace on down everyone's throat.
That's fine because you're on my team,
right?
Yay,
So
ogres! Go get them, Yetis!
So the social contract is good as long as it's not bending you personally over the table. Gotcha.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
I know which way the wind blows.
Right. No, I can go with that. I can understand that.
Yeah.
So let me ask, I've been kind of driving our discussion here other than the questions. Is there any other points that we haven't made yet in terms of sort of the narrative construction of the two types of games that you wanted to bring up?
I think you have to look at it. If you know somebody's watching this and they're saying, those guys are cool. They have a cool narrative. I want to build one. First of all, you have to make sure that the people that you're playing with are on board with what you're thinking. Because if one person is going to be outside of the box all the time, it's not going to make for a good story. You got to have that in play first before anything else happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you take the time and the initiative, to write stuff down, to go over and do test battles, even that's what we've been kind of doing lately, just to see what works and what doesn't. I think if you take the time to do it properly, you're going to enjoy it just as much as we've enjoyed it so far. And I think we're going to really enjoy the next campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I'm even though I'm still not motivated enough, I still have kind of lost my motivation for painting. I haven't lost my motivation for playing. So I'm excited to actually put the wood elves on the board and get used to their intricacies and things like that. So I think if you have all that in a good combination, your narrative is going to be great, and especially if you're going in for the role-playing side of it too. If you have all that, and people who have creative minds, that can play off of each other, I think the sky's the limit on what you can do.
Fantastic. Well, let me ask you this as sort of a follow-up to that. Would you ever play in a narrative campaign like we're doing with players that you didn't know? Just kind of like pick up group at the local game store kind of thing?
I would say no, because I would want to get to know them better, to see what their styles are, to see if it compares with mine. To see if I'm going to get any enjoyment out of it, and it gets them to know me and see if they're going to enjoy me being there. I think that you're going to have to take time to get to know the people that you're playing with before you can put together a very good, successful, long-going narrative campaign.
I can definitely see that. Mm-hmm. So let's see. Vince responded with something else. I want to read it because I'm going to read it out loud because I'm having trouble understanding what he's going to say. But I told you earlier, my brain is French fried right now. So it says, if it's easier, it's definitely partly because of the GM. In worlds of accepting GMs and versions of D&D with more power differentiation, it can be much easier for that same thing to happen of overshadowing. There's also the fact that Warhammer is in some degree competitive even in the narrative mode, that there are still fights to win and lose, whereas with D&D you're all driving, quote-unquote, theoretically most of the time, towards the same destination, i.e. cooperative versus competitive play. I'm not sure what specific point that was attached to, but it sounds good to me. I agree. I think you're never going to get rid of the competitiveness in Warhammer, because it's a function of being. I mean, at the end of the day, any given game of Warhammer is going to end in one of three ways: somebody wins, somebody loses, or you both tie. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I definitely would agree that it's hard, even if you are primarily driving towards a narrative ideal, to even to get rid of that enough to have it be a non-issue.
And that's one thing that you have to do in a narrative. If you lose, you still have to continue on with the narrative. You have to be willing to say, okay, well, I've lost. What is going to happen to my character now? How would he react to this? And again, you brought it up. I think that makes it a little bit stronger because you're forced to use your imagination more than with the way that you were thinking. Now you've got to fall back and regroup and say, okay, which direction? I thought I was going to go this way. Now I might have to go this way or back that way.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about you, but that's kind of the end of everything I wanted to say on this particular topic. At least at the moment, I can't think of any other ways to put it that don't sound like we would just be repeating ourselves over and over again. So this will be a slightly shorter episode than normal. One thing I did want to kind of talk to folks or kind of mention in here and get some feedback in the comments is sort of maybe a new sort of growth out of the channel. One thing I am considering is I would very much like to expand the channel somewhat. We're still doing the battle reports, and Narrations and Lamentations isn't going anywhere. Don't worry about any of that. But there are other hobbies that, frankly, we've had longer than Warhammer that we would like to explore. And this show was sort of a test run for that. I have been giving some serious thought into sort of expanding and starting to do some role-playing game coverage. Primarily like old school style D&D stuff. Because frankly, that's what I know. It's what I enjoy. I think it would be fun to bring that in and do some videos just kind of talking about my thoughts on the games and telling fun stories of games past and even product reviews of old stuff, because I have God knows how much that I'm collecting. One of my bucket list aspirations to own every product released by TSR during the second edition run of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm well on my way towards that goal.
It's like sitting in the Library of Congress when we're gaming.
I don't know that I'd go that far, but I do think I have a fairly impressive set of shelves. But so to the end, to that end, I want to ask you, our viewers, if that's something that you would be interested in. I would think that there is a certain amount of cross-pollination in interests, particularly for folks who are here watching my channel, as I've never made any mistake or never basically made it hidden that the narration and the narrative style gaming is really what we're here for. So if it's something that you guys would be interested in and you'd like to see that kind of content, please put it in the notes if there's anything specific you'd like to see in terms of videos. I was doing some talking with Vince Venturella about this idea this week, and I've decided, much in flying directly in the face of his recommendation and advice, I might add, to have the first target be... Oops, hold on a minute. Talk for a minute, Skip.
Okay. The first target, I don't know what he was going with that, but anyway, I would like to see it. I think that we could do something, not even just in the fantasy genre, but we've got some experience in superheroes and things like that, to where it could eventually branch off into that way. And between you and I think we know some people in the business. I know a lot of folks from Green Ronin that I used to game with when I was in college. So we can get people on to discuss that too. And all my old friends love to talk about games, so it would be a hoot and a holler.
All right, so sorry to throw you on the spot. My mother was calling about something, and I had to throw the phone at my wife because she doesn't know about the weekly show, I don't think. But so to get back to what I was talking about as my first idea for a video that flies directly in the face of Vince's recommendation, is he said that if I enter into the role-playing game world, I should do so with humility and recognize it as a major undertaking, that sort of thing. And I've decided instead I'm going to put a big old fat landmine in front of it and sit on it and see if it entertains you guys enough to watch the video. And by that, the first thing I want to do is a video discussing my opinions of the different editions of Dungeons and Dragons. It would be personally an opinion piece, just kind of discussing what I see as the strengths and weaknesses in my experience experience with the editions, and I would stick from like AD&D first edition through D&D next, like the 5th edition they're calling it. And I get the feeling that it's going to get me a heck of a lot of hate. That was actually the other big thing he recommended to me. It was like, you seem to be somewhat sensitive about your downvotes. Get used to that because you're going to get a lot of them. So, if that sounds like something you guys would enjoy seeing, please let me know. I would very much like to not alienate everyone, and it's not like I'm not saying I'm going to be replacing any of my Warhammer content with other content. It's just stuff to have fun doing other videos about. So if there is interest in that, please let us know. So any other final thoughts, my friend?
No, I'm actually looking forward to the new campaign beginning. Speaking of D&D, I'm looking forward to Sunday's adventure. And I think that there's a lot of good stuff that people are going to start seeing on this channel when it comes to the new campaign. That if you like the old one, you're really going to love what we're going to be ready to do. I think it's going to be really exciting.
And I'm also apparently going to have commercials now done by Skip, because that was the best plug. So one last check. I don't think we have any more comments as of yet. I'm sure, as always, as soon as I hit the off button, I'm going to get like 9 emails saying, you got comments, and people will feel left out. I don't mean to let you guys feel left out. But hope you guys enjoyed this one. Like I said, this is kind of a weird topic for us in terms of I don't think there's anything concrete about the game we were discussing this week compared to some of the others, but hopefully you guys were interested in it. If you have any thoughts on the narrative structure of campaigns versus D&D or RPGs, leave it in the comments. We'll be more than happy to keep the conversation going there and get some different ideas. So, but thanks everyone. We've actually had some pretty solid viewership through the whole show, so thank you guys for watching. And we will catch you next time with a brand new topic that I have no idea what it is yet. So look forward to next week, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Adios.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.